Mayflies by Meana Starkey. Chapter 2. After much preparation and many more heartfelt and tearful goodbyes, the three of them departed from their planet. As their craft left the outer hemisphere of the place they had always known as home, they all stared out at it in silence until it was out of view. Sanji pulled out a map to help distract herself. She did not want Berba to guess that she might be having second thoughts. Berba appreciated her initiative and focus. He settled himself down beside her to view the map with her. Maybe this wasn't going to be so bad after all, he thought to himself. They would do what they'd set out to do, then quickly return home. No problem, he thought again to himself, trying to settle his nerves. He did not want Sanji to know that he had second thoughts. All three of them had been trained on the many features of the craft, as well as how to feed it. There was also a backup system in place. It was currently on autopilot to take them to their first assigned location to search for specimens. But if there was any trouble, the craft could easily be maneuvered once reset to manual. The craft itself was extremely comfortable. The living organisms that the craft was composed of were mostly from sap extracted from saba and boba trees. It could take on almost any shape and mold itself to almost any situation, as if it had a mind of its own. Berba was glad that Seraph had decided to join them. They had been friends for a few thousand years. Seraph was only a little over 10,000 years old, so basically still a teenager in some ways, and like a son to him. He proved himself to be quite an annoyance at times, but still, his presence was a comfort all the same. The first planet that the ship approached was quite beautiful from a distance. It at first seemed to have a purple hue to it, but as they drew closer to it, they realized that it was a dead planet. It was obvious that no life in any form had been present on it for a very long time, if there had ever been life there in the first place. They all looked at each other and nodded in agreement. They would move on without stopping. The next planet seemed to have more possibilities. They all joyfully got off the ship and began to gather specimens, placing them in bubble-like jars made from the same substance as their craft. The act of gathering specimens made it feel like going home was just around the corner. However, they had promised to collect specimens from at least 3 planets before returning. After agreeing that they had probably gathered enough of a variety, they quickly made their way back onto the ship and set off for the next destination. This is going to be a breeze after all, Berba thought to himself. 1 down and 2 to go, Berba exclaimed cheerfully. High fives were exchanged all around. Berba snuck in a little ass slap on Sanji's backside. She responded by giving him a cheeky grin. In seemingly no time at all, they had reached the next point on the map. The craft slowly approached the surface. They could clearly see gray plant-like beings rolling and writhing on the surface of the planet. The plants began extending vine-like arms towards the craft at breakneck speed and began attempting to pull the craft down to its surface. Seraph gasped, Sanji let out a scream, and Berba began to yell. Go to manual! Go to manual! Those things are going to drag us down! Sanji, struggling with the controls, then yelled out, Help me get this thing out of autopilot! Seraph and Berba rushed over to her side, and all 3 of them began to frantically adjust controls until something clicked and the ship abruptly jerked backwards. The entire ship was engulfed with vines. As the craft broke away abruptly, a small hole tore and the craft began to shrink like a balloon with enough force to slam everyone every which way, then finally pushing them together into an awkward huddle. Seraph yanked his crystal from around his waist, and Seraph and Sanji squirmed, trying to move out of the way so he could reach the damaged area. Berba held the crystal to the damaged spot, healing it on impact. The craft then slowly expanded back to normal size, upon which everyone burst into a small fit of nervous but relieved laughter. Their laughter was almost immediately interrupted by the realization that a vine was still clinging clinging to the side of the ship and was attempting to pierce the hull. They could hear what sounded like a voice emitting from the plant. It sounded as if it were screaming in agony. "Help me! Help me!" it screamed over and over. In a fit of panic, all three of them whipped off their crystals and tried to prevent the vine from piercing the ship. With a sigh of relief, they watched as it slowly lost its grip and fell away back to the surface below. As the vine reached the surface of the planet, another much larger vine reached up and snatched it mid-air and drug it down out of view. They all stood silent for a moment, looking at each other in stunned silence. Seraph, with a horrified look on his face, said, "I don't know. I didn't know plants could scream." They were all staring intently at the spot where the vine had disappeared when Berba finally cleared his throat and murmured, "Yeah, well, I think maybe we should just move on." After the initial shock of what they had just witnessed began to fade a bit, they all decided to settle down for a bit of a snack. Berba pulled out what appeared to be a meager-sized bag containing the repast. With portions of mostly nuts and berries, he handed out a small ration to each person. He took a few berries in his hand, crushed them into a pulp before gingerly smearing them onto the side of the wall inside the craft. The ship greedily ate his offering, making fizzing sounds and convulsing as it absorbed the nutrients. Seraph slid down into a comfortable position on the opposite side of the craft, slowly nibbling at his food and staring absent-mindedly out into space. Sanji and Berba snuggled on their side of the craft, staring deeply into each other's eyes as they ate. It was at times like this that they wished they had traveled alone. Berba leaned in closer to Sanji and whispered into her ear, "You know these berries are tasty, but you're looking even tastier right now." Sanji blushed in response. "Not now, Berba. You're going to have to wait," as she pointedly glanced over at Seraph. Berba grunted his disappointment and sighed. Shortly after this, they all fell into an exhausted, fitful sleep. Sanji dreamt they were all back home, safe in their beloved forest. Berba dreamt that he was back at the time when their planet was in the middle of the war, back when he had witnessed so many needless losses. So much needless loss. Seraph dreamt that he had found his true mate. She looked unusual, though. She had a weak body with thin, almost translucent skin, a weird-looking protrusion that stuck out in the middle of her face. No horns, tail, and almost no skin shoots to speak of besides a strange, stringy-looking tuft that hung from the top of her head. Only her eyes were recognizable to him. Her eyes. "Seraph, my love!" she cried, holding out her weak, thin arms toward him. "Come to me, my love," she cried again as tears rolled down her cheeks. Seraph felt a pull unlike any that he had ever experienced before. The pain it rendered in him left him speechless as he stepped towards her in the dream, but somehow could never reach her. Sensors began to go off in the craft. All three of them jolted awake and looked around in a state of confusion. They appeared to be on the outskirts of a planet that was not on their map. The screens indicated that there was plant life, as well as other forms of life present on the planet. They began arguing amongst themselves as to whether they should risk landing the craft and taking samples. Seraph was the first to speak. "I'm not sure if this is a good idea. This planet's not on the map. We don't know if it's safe. It would probably be best if we kept going until we reached the next point on the map." "The last two planets were on the map, and neither of them were safe," Berba interjected. "Why did the craft stop here? I thought the craft was back on autopilot." Sanji said as she fervently searched the different screens. "I don't understand this either, but what if this place has what we're looking for?" Berba stated as he took in the beauty of the planet. It reminded him of home, with its greens, blues, and whites. There appeared to be much larger bodies of water than they had on their own planet, along with a lot less land. I just have a bad feeling about this, Seraph stated in no uncertain terms. A sound that could only be discerned as dread filled his voice. At this, Berba snapped at him. We did not come all this way to allow fear to stop us now. Think about the other couples wanting a family as bad as Sanji and I do. Think about the future of our tribe, our species. This planet could be our only hope. I agree with Berba, Sanji stated, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't be as cautious as possible. We don't know what kind of threat may be waiting down there for us. Seraph started to say more, but decided that it was of no use. They prepared to descend.